And all right, recording. All right, go ahead.
Well, welcome to our session. We're real happy today to talk about how to make a presentation that's accessible to individuals with disabilities who might be participating. We'll actually be practicing some of what we preach today in the session. I'm Sheryl Burgstahler, and my colleague is Brianna Burgstahler. I mean, Brianna Blaser. I've adopted you, Brianna. Brianna Blaser at the Do It Center, which is at the University of Washington. And so we'll get this party started. As was mentioned, put some questions in the chat if you'd like us to address them at the end. But also, we're going to put our email address. And so if you wanted a copy of these PowerPoints, you could send us email and we'll be happy to send them. That address, by the way, is doit@uw.edu. So let's get started. We do a lot of presentations and Do It, and so we're real happy to talk about this topic, and others can share other ideas that they've developed in doing that as well. So I direct 2 units at the University of Washington under my group, which is the Access Technology Services. So we have an IT accessibility team of technology specialists that are focused on accessibility. We've been around since 1984, although things have really changed technology-wise when we first got started. Funded by the University of Washington. In that group, we make sure that IT procured, developed, and used by the University of Washington is accessible to people with disabilities. That would be faculty, staff, students, and visitors. Right now, we have a big effort in making commencement accessible to people with disabilities. Then I'd also direct the Do It Center, disabilities, opportunities, internetworking, and technology. And in that area, we started in 1992. It is funded by federal, state, corporate, private foundations, etc. And so we have a series of projects funded under the Do It umbrella. We started an international program in Japan in 2007 called Do It Japan. You can check that out, Google it, but most of it is in Japanese. So we'll see if you can gain much content from it, but there are pictures of the things they do there, much like what we're doing in our program in Seattle. We also have started the Center on Universal Design and Education, which started in 1999. It's funded by the US Department of Education. So in all of our projects, we have an individual-centered community building model where we're looking at stakeholders like you're one of the stakeholders that contribute to the success of people with disabilities. Even simply the way you deliver your presentations at a conference like this makes you a stakeholder. And so what we do is we look at the success of people with disabilities in academic STEM careers. We look at the person with a disability, the family members, their peers, their professional organizations and service providers, and so forth, to make sure that everything is accessible and inclusive of them, including technology, so that they can fully participate. The Do It Center then helps students with disabilities develop self-determination skills. And that's just a broad term that talks about the knowledge and skills and the resources that they need to be successful in whatever they're pursuing. But then we also help institutions apply universal design to create inclusive instruction and services and physical spaces, technology, and employment. So our talk today is in this second category. Some of the projects that we have are all collaborations. So there are some that are focused more generally on access to college and careers. Our Do It Center is focused on that area, as well as a project called Access College, which led to the Center on Universal Design and Education. We have a lot of projects that are focused on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Access STEM, which has a general focus. Access STEM Careers, which guess what, focuses on careers in STEM for people with disabilities. And then Access ISL, which focuses on informal science learning, and Access Advance, where we're working with faculty members who are women who have disabilities and helping to make particularly our STEM programs that are post-secondary classes and campuses more inclusive of them. And then we have that focus a lot on IT, access computing, working with faculty to make their courses more accessible, but also include accessibility topics within their courses and computing. CS for All is similar, but focused on K-12, and Access DL zeroes down and focuses on distance learning, and Access Cyber Learning, a research project where we developed a web paper about what needs to be done to make sure that IT in the future that we use to deliver our courses and other presentations are inclusive of people with disabilities. And then we have our international efforts. I talked about Do It Japan, but also EDICT, which also includes a number of different countries. So we do a lot of things. And again, they all kind of focus on different stakeholder groups, usually multiple stakeholders in each one. But when it comes to accessibility, if we look at the topic of this presentation is what do presenters need to know? And because we're in the middle of a pandemic, we're primarily talking about online presentations, but they apply to on-site as well. You might take a look at this list of universities and colleges as well. Harvard, University of Cincinnati, University of Colorado, MIT, CSU, Fullerton, University of Kentucky, Harvard. I guess we have Harvard in there twice. I get double booking here, but anyway, what do they have in common? And we're not going to have a chat about that. But one thing they have in common is that they've received civil rights complaints about the inaccessible design of their IT. So what is the legal basis for those complaints and ultimate resolutions with the Office of Civil Rights or the Department of Justice? Well, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is one, and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and its 2008 amendments. Many people, when I bring this up, say, well, wait a minute, 1973, we weren't even using technology. We certainly didn't have an internet back then. Well, the important thing to remember is those laws are civil rights laws. And so they don't include technical details. They don't talk about what you're using to present whatever you're offering. They say that whatever you're offering to the public, even if it's a private institution, if you're offering it to people in the public, it needs to be accessible and inclusive of people with disabilities in that particular population you're dealing with. So what in those resolutions, there are hundreds of them, by the way, and so you don't want to be on that list. We and our IT accessibility team spend a lot of time not being on that particular list, although the resolutions do usually end up in more staff devoted to accessibility. But the Office of Civil Rights or Department of Justice kind of takes over your efforts and prioritizes for you, which is not something we like to do in higher ed. But it does, all these resolutions, they do give us a definition of what it means to be accessible, particularly in terms of using IT like for a presentation, but today. Accessible means a person with a disability is afforded the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as a person without a disability, as an equally effective and equally integrated manner with substantially equivalent ease of use. So it's a pretty clear description, which basically says people with disabilities ought to be able to do whatever you're offering, just like other people. And it should be easy for them to use, and they should be included in what we're doing, which can be applied to online learning, but also to presentations that we're talking today, actually anything that we offer through our organizations. But so what does it mean to have an inclusive environment? Well, for me, it means that everyone who meets the requirements with or without accommodations is invited to participate. Everyone feels welcome, and it engages everyone. And so those are kind of what we're looking at. It's pretty basic. One way to look at it is in terms of who might be requiring access and maybe some special considerations, which we'll talk about later. And I think it's easiest for us as a group here, unless we're a disability services offices, not to actually worry too much about what the medical diagnosis is of someone who might need accommodation, but just to actually think more broadly that everyone in this presentation and in your courses is on the spectrum from not able to able in every ability that we could list. So for instance, the ability to see, hear, walk, read, print, write with a pen or a pencil, communicate verbally, tune out distraction, the ability to learn, or to manage physical and mental health. We all could be measured. For example, in the ability to see, many people start way to the right of that when they're a young child and decide to slip down toward the left when they join the senior citizens. And so it's a moving target, and the ability to hear or walk as well. What we need to be aware of is what the abilities of people might have and how that impacts their participation. So that's what we'll talk about here. So what's an accommodation focused approach? This is the primary approach for giving access to people with disabilities on our post-secondary campus and just about any place else. And so what we do in an accommodation focused approach is to adjust an existing product or environment. In other words, you create your talk and then you adjust it later when you find out, oh my goodness, a person who's blind is going to participate in this session. What do I need to do? So you think about it ahead of time. And what's really common in any online activity, including those for presentations like this, is creating accessible documents. So attachments, for instance, I said you could email us and we'll send you the PowerPoints, should be designed in an accessible manner. And ours are, so that if you happen to be blind or you want to share it with someone who is, they would be able to access that PowerPoint using their screen reader. I don't need to know, Brianna doesn't need to know whether that's necessary. We just make it our standard practice. Captioning videos, many people use YouTube, for instance, and they see the captions on there that are automatically generated by a computer. And they think, well, yeah, all my videos are captioned. Well, that's not good enough for a student who's deaf. We all know how silly sometimes those captions can be because they're generated by a computer. What most people seem to not know, based on looking at the captions on YouTube, that it's actually relatively easy to go in and edit any videos that you put up, to edit those captions. And so you can look up those features. And if it's your video, so you know the content, adding punctuation and correcting misspelled words is not usually a lot of heavy lifting. And then you all of a sudden had made your video accessible to a person with who is deaf or hard of hearing. Otherwise, that has to be provided, that effort needs to be provided as an accommodation. So our Disability Services Office have been overwhelmed with inaccessible documents that have to be converted. Generally, they're PDF files that can be difficult to convert. And also captioning or recaptioning these videos. So sometimes it's really important to look at the design of the product or the environment, in this case, your presentation, for other things relative to this conference in your online learning course. So you should reconsider that design. And that's where we come into the idea of universal design. It's a way of doing that. And so it provides us with a nice framework. So universal design is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people. So that's just like everyone, to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. And on this slide, I have a picture of a name tag. It actually has my name on it. But we set about in the Do It program to universally design a name tag, which basically means we want our name tags at our events, back in the day when we used to have on-site events, to be inclusive of everyone that might need to use them, people in our events. And so the image represents the name tag we use. And in that image, we have a lanyard. I hear from many people who run conferences that that's the most popular way to have a new name tag. I personally don't like lanyards because the name tag is down too low on the body, and also they can flip over, and then you just see a blank there at a reception or whatever. So we do include the lanyards. Why? Because people like them. So that's okay. They can have a lanyard as free choice. But we also then put the name on both sides. So my name would be on both sides of that name tag, because then we don't have to worry about it flipping over. But also, if you notice carefully, we have at the end of the lanyard a loop, metal loop, and then the name tag itself actually clips to that loop. What does that mean? Well, it means we can take the name tag off of the lanyard. And so if you want to use a clip and you want to, connect it to your collar, you can do that. And also there's a safety pin that is available on that back side as well, or that side that is being displayed, and you can pin it. If you don't have a collar a certain day, you could pin it to whatever you're wearing. So the advantage then is it pleases more people. We don't just please look at the average person. Maybe the average person does want to use lanyards. That's fine, we'll provide that. But there are other people as well who might have other choices. And even though they might be on the end of the low end of the normal curve, small quantities of them, that's okay. We're trying to make things more inclusive. Is the name tag perfectly inclusive to someone who's totally blind? Not really. So we don't have to be perfect in all cases, but the idea, the process is to just be thinking about thinking rather than what would most people want. You think, what's a great diversity of people? What are the three most popular ways to have a name tag? And let's see if we can provide all of them in one design. Can't always do it, but you should at least ask the question. Accommodations versus universal design. The differences are accommodations are reactive and universal design is proactive. Accommodations are for the benefit of one who requests an accommodation, and universal design for the request, the benefit of many. There's a perfect example of this, something that's in common practice today, the universal design of physical spaces, and the practice is curb cuts and sidewalks. On this slide, I have an image of the Daily, front page of the Daily, the student newspaper here at the University of Washington in 1970. A young man in a wheelchair has a sign on the back saying, "Ramp the curbs, get me off the street." Back in the 70s, that was very controversial, that you'd put curb cuts in every curb just because a few people in wheelchairs might want to use them. Well, we know that these days it's just standard practice to put ramps in curb cuts. I mean, ramps in sidewalks called curb cuts. And the people who use them are not people that are in wheelchairs for the most part, but pushing baby strollers and delivery carts and unfortunately skateboarders and so forth. So that's an adoption of a universal design feature. Another one is in our common practice with our smartphones. We have come to accept that there are accessibility features that include enlarging the text, changing the background and foreground, and all sorts of things we can do. Those were features that were assistive technology for people with disabilities in the past, but now they've been adopted by everyone because they're so valuable for the whole population. So building in accessibility is one thing, but also ensuring compatibility with assistive technology people with disabilities might be using as well is important. To show you how valuable universal design is to everyone, you don't have to look any farther than videos. Captioning videos, accurate captions, certainly benefits people who are deaf or hard of hearing, but it also benefits English language learners who benefit from seeing the words as well as hearing them. People in noisy environments like airports can watch a video by just reading the captions. In a noiseless environment, like if you're in the room where your baby is sleeping, you could read the captions on the video, or in a library. Those with slow internet connections who want to turn off the visuals and just look at the captions. What if you want to know the spelling of words? Accurate captions helps there. And you can also search through the captions to find specific content in a course. And so that's typical of universal design. It benefits everyone. For those that are now excited about universal design, if you haven't heard about it before, or you've just gotten started hearing about it, there are actually 3 sets of principles that underpin universal design. You can look at our website to learn all about it, maybe more than you want to know. But the 7 principles of universal design back in the early 90s help us design physical environments and digital environments that are inclusive of people with a wide variety of characteristics, including people who are left-handed or right-handed and have characteristics that are not necessarily disabilities, but should be considered in designing the computer lab in that case, for example. There are the 3 principles of universal design for learning that particularly talk about the engagement we have in our courses, but also in our presentations. And then when we talk about the universal design of IT, there are 4 principles that underpin the web content accessibility guidelines that are international in scope and provide technical details on how to make the technology accept all the technology we're using accessible to people with disabilities. Luckily, you don't have to remember a lot of principles, but you can think of these 3 things and they'll kind of guide you in the right direction if you're designing a course or a presentation. Provide multiple ways for participants to learn and to demonstrate what they've learned. In this presentation, we have some visuals that we hope are helpful, but we have text as well. Provide multiple ways to engage. In some presentations, we'd have small groups and large groups and so forth, and that's something to consider. If ours was longer today, we would be doing that. Ensuring that all technologies and facilities and services and resources and strategies are accessible to individuals with a wide variety of disabilities. And Brianna is going to pick up and talk about some of those specific strategies. So basically, in summary, If you apply universal design, you need to provide fewer accommodations. And it's not that accommodations are bad. I just think we rely on that practice too much. There are some tried and true techniques that mean people with disabilities don't have to request a special consideration for their disability. And that's the goal we're after. So in summary, universal design is an attitude, a goal, a process that values diversity, equity, inclusion. You can even use it as a framework to guide those efforts that so many of us have in our campuses, because it deals with other characteristics, not just disability, promotes best practice, does not lower the standards. It's proactive, can be implemented incrementally, benefits everyone or almost everyone, and minimizes the need for accommodation. So that provides a framework. Some people will say, oh, how can I learn all this stuff about people with disabilities and assistive technology and so forth? And I always recommend a good place to start is just to think of a few people that might be in your presentation. And so today, as Brianna and I prepared this, we have actually 4 people that are in some Do It programs that we actually know personally. Think of someone like Anthony, who has a physical disability. He might not be able to use a keyboard, a standard keyboard, but he has his own. And so he can actually do anything that you and I can do on the keyboard, but not necessarily a mouse. So resources we point to, for instance, should be available to him using a keyboard. You don't need to know about all the gadgets he's using to access that website or your PowerPoint or whatever. But anyway, it's good to know that it's a good practice to not require the use of the mouse in whatever you're doing in your course or whatever. And then Jessie, who has learning disabilities. And reading our PowerPoint, one of her disabilities would allow her to use the slides we would share with you using a screen reader. So she could have all that content in the PowerPoint read aloud to her, which is a real benefit with her learning disability. Adrian's deaf, and so captions benefit him. And Nicole is blind. So we make sure that we describe enough about our PowerPoints in this case, so that Nicole could participate in this presentation. Doesn't mean you have to have a lot of detail, but just making sure you describe the critical content. I always like to assume somebody's calling into my presentation on a phone, and so describe enough so they can follow along. So now we're going to talk about our case study, and Brianna is going to take it from here.
I have to unmute myself. Sorry. So we're going to talk about ways that we can make sure online presentations and meetings are inclusive, both through accommodations and universal design. And I'll say a lot of this is not all that different than what you would want to do for an in-person presentation or meeting. The big difference being that in person, you're going to be more worried about the physical environment, which may mean things like making sure the space is accessible to somebody who uses a wheelchair, or making sure that a microphone gets passed around the room and that folks speak into a microphone. So again, Sheryl was talking about some of the barriers that folks might have to a presentation. And again, some of the things that we might think about are somebody who is blind or visually impaired, deaf or hard of hearing, or has those attention or learning related disabilities. So thinking about these populations as you're designing your presentation. So the other thing I like to make sure to think about is that there are also non-disability related barriers. One example I think of a lot is non-native speakers of English. So Sheryl was talking about captioned videos, and there's research out there that shows that non-native speakers of English benefit from using the captions in a meeting. And if you can turn them on these days in Zoom, Zoom has slowly been rolling that out to institutional subscriptions. So you just turn it on at the bottom of the screen. I encourage you to turn it on and see what it's like, see how accurate they are, and what it might be like for somebody who's using captions to access a meeting. You know, other non-disability related barriers could be something like, in this day of online meetings, we often have somebody who calls in on a phone, right? Not because of a disability related barrier, but maybe because they're in transit, dropping a kid off at school or whatnot. They still need to be able to access the meeting, even though they can't see the presentation. So we're going to talk about some different aspects of a meeting. We're going to talk a little bit about software you're using online and whether that's accessible. We'll talk a little bit about preparing for your presentation or meeting, your presentation materials, delivery, and then follow up as well. So one thing to keep in mind is that not all meeting software is accessible. You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, as universities were moving online and we were talking with students we worked with, we were hearing from students who were at universities that used conferencing software that wasn't accessible to them. So that can be an issue. Zoom is pretty good with accessibility, and that's what we use at UW. So find out whether what you're using is going to be accessible, particularly to somebody who uses a screen reader or doesn't use mouse input. So again, it needs to input with the screen readers or other assistive technology that folks might be using. The other thing to find out is whether it supports captioning or sign language interpreters. So again, you can, in Zoom, you can turn on those automatic captions, but you can also have a live person join and caption the meeting, which tends to be more accurate and uses punctuation. There's also functionality within, for example, Zoom, if you're using a sign language interpreter, to pin them so that they are always visible, and is useful for that. Become familiar with the accessibility features of the software that you are using. If somebody asks about them, know how to point them to the information on how to learn about how to use the software. And again, share any relevant accessibility information with participants. So when we start a meeting or a presentation, we almost always have the captions on, and I'll tell folks how to access those captions if that's something that they need. Again, as you're preparing, think about the diversity of your audience. So again, the kinds of things that I'm really interested in and thinking about in that context is the extent to which people can hear, see, and speak and understand the language you're speaking in. If you're advertising a presentation, you want to make it clear how to request accommodations. And I like to point out that what somebody might need in an online meeting may be different from what they need in an in-person meeting, just to be prepared for that. And then know how to respond to these requests. So I frequently hear from people with disabilities that are like, I requested an accommodation, but I never heard anything back. I don't know if it's going to be accessible to me. So really, one way that you can assuage the anxiety of folks and make them feel welcome and included is letting them know that, yes, you got their request and you're working on it, or you got their request and here's the resolution to what they need. So the most common requests that you might get, particularly in this context of an online presentation, would be accessible versions of the presentations. So we almost always share our slides with folks. Again, some folks benefit from reviewing that information ahead of time, particularly somebody who might be using something like a sign language interpreter, where they may be looking at the interpreter for most of the time and not looking at the slides. Folks might request, again, sign language. They might request captioning. And again, automatic captioning tools exist, but typically when somebody requests an accommodation, that wouldn't suffice to give them equal access. And that's when you would call in a human captioner to caption. Another thing you might consider doing is recording, particularly given this last year where we know folks' schedules are not what they're used to. There are times people just can't join in. So can you record your presentation as a way of giving more people access? That can also be beneficial to folks who missed something the first time around, perhaps because of a disability related reason, and they want to go back and review that. The other thing that we like to do when we're managing meetings or presentations is have someone separate from the presenter manage the meeting, right? So they're the person who's looking at the waiting room, they're the person who's managing and responding in the chat. So somebody who's presenting isn't trying to do multiple things at the same time. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so thinking about your presentation materials and if you're designing slides, some things that you want to think about are using a high contrast color scheme so that folks can see the slides clearly. This is important online, but it's also important in an in-person meeting. I'm sure you've all had the experience where the lights are on pretty bright in a room and the slides are projected and you cannot read them because they're not high contrast enough. So that's one you really need to think about in multiple arenas. If you're concerned about whether it's high contrast or not enough, there are color checkers that you can use online to look at two colors next to each other. Black on white is great, white on black is great. Things like blue on red, don't do that. Just don't do that. Make sure to use large fonts. Again, this helps make it more readable, particularly in an online meeting where you don't know the size of the display that somebody may be using to access the meeting. I know other folks that like to make the slides very small so that they can see, for example, the lips, if they're lip reading of the person who's speaking. And as they do that, the slides are going to get smaller, so that larger font will really benefit them. Keep the text brief and the graphics simple. So if you have too much text on your slides, that's going to require split somebody's attention, right? Because I don't know about you, but if I see a bunch of text on a slide, I'm going to read what's on that slide because there's no other reason it would be in front of me. But if I'm reading what's on the slide and that's different from what the speaker is saying, my attention's divided between the two and I'm not really listening to them. And again, keeping graphics simple, you want folks to be able to see them. Really complicated pictures, or how often have you been in a meeting where somebody throws up a slide and it's got a really complicated chart and they say, well, I know you can't read that. Well, if you know I can't read it, how am I benefiting from it being on the slide? Instead, distill it down to what's the most important piece of information and show your audience that. Think about using more than color coding to communicate information. So if you say, do you see the red bullet point up there? Somebody who's colorblind is not going to be able to access that information. Again, we want to think about using captioned videos if you're showing videos. The other thing to think about is whether your videos are audio described. And audio description is an added track on a video that describes what's on the screen. And an example I used to give at an organization I used to work for, we had a video we would show before presentation. So it was like a 1-minute video, but it talked about the historical impact of that organization. And I thought it was so powerful. Literally brought tears to my eyes the first time I saw it. But there was no audio in the whole video. So the only thing a blind person would get out of that video, which I thought was quite moving, was just some lovely music, right? And that's not what we were trying to impart from that video. So if there had been audio description that described what was happening, that would be much more meaningful to a blind person. And if you've never seen an audio described video, I encourage you to go to our website, uw.edu/DOIT, and you can find our videos and you can toggle the audio description on and off on those videos to see what that adds to the video. So thinking about your presentation materials, prepare them ahead of time, prepare an agenda if that's relevant for your meeting, share it with folks. Again, some folks will benefit from having access to the electronic version. For example, somebody using a screen reader in this meeting cannot access the presentation. So if they had an electronic version, they could access that as we went along. And if you're using interpreters or captioners in their meeting, they will benefit from having access to those materials ahead of time to help them prepare. And we can go to the next slide. So some things you want to think about saying that are not particularly accessible to folks, you know, as you can see from this graph, and then talking about something, we'll describe what's on that graph because somebody might not be able to see it. I like this example too. Somebody saying, you never know who you'll meet, and then they flash up a picture of somebody like Barack Obama on the screen and everybody laughs. The blind person in the room isn't going to know who's on the screen, or somebody who maybe is not from the US may not know who that person is, right? So giving context to any visual elements, again, pointing at the screen, as you can see right here, describe what it is rather than, again, just pointing and assuming that everybody can see that. And, you know, you think again about how this might not just benefit somebody who's blind, but somebody who can't see the screen. Even if you're in a physical environment, there's oftentimes you're trying to look over somebody's head and you can't see the bottom of the screen. There are reasons to describe this stuff, a variety of reasons. So things I like to think about during online meetings and presentations is things like looking over the names in the participant list and making sure that they are all meaningful. So whether that's asking folks to include information like their organization or their pronouns in the list, changing it so it's actually their name and not their child's name. Muting participants who aren't speaking, again, to keep the audio clear, considering whether to use automatic captioning tools. We've talked about that. I like to give instructions to folks too about how they can ask questions. Is it okay to interrupt the meeting with questions? Do you prefer them in the chat? Do you want folks to use the hand raising function? I like to offer folks multiple ways of asking a question because I know some folks will benefit from writing them in the chat, and I know other folks express themselves better or feel they express themselves better verbally and would prefer to raise their hand and ask. Depending on the meeting, you might just consider whether you want to allow time for introductions and how you want that to run. I like to point out that in online meetings, we have much better success with this if we call on folks so that they know when it's their turn to speak, because we're lacking those visual cues that we might have if we were in person. Another thing that we do a lot is encouraging participants to speak their names every time that they speak. This is, again, something we do both online and in person, but it means that folks in the room who can't see that person or don't know them know who's speaking, and they don't have to rely upon recognizing somebody's voice. You can go to the next one. Things to think about, I encourage folks to consider using a headset when presenting because it can lead to some clearer audio. Thinking about a variety of instructional methods. So what does that mean online? Online, it might mean making use of polls. It might mean making use of breakout rooms. I had a great discussion recently with some folks about, okay, when we do use breakout rooms, how big of a group do we want in those rooms that leads to a good conversation where everyone can talk, but doesn't make folks feel like they have to talk. You can encourage discussion in the chat. That can be another place that folks can interact. Make sure that you speak all the content on your slides. Again, if it's on your slide, it must be there because it's important. Make sure that everybody can hear it. Verbally describing images and graphics. Now, we have some images in this presentation. They are mostly just drawings of people with disabilities, so we haven't been describing them because they're not related to the content. But Sheryl did describe, for example, the picture from the UW Daily. She described the picture of the name tag because those were really important visuals that she wanted to share. One thing we encourage folks to do is to pause momentarily after changing the slide. This is really helpful to folks who may be using captions or maybe using a sign language interpreter so that they can see what's on the slide and then go back to their interpreter and they have that break. We also encourage folks to use understandable terms. If you're using a lot of jargon, that can again make it hard for a variety of folks to follow your presentation. We always follow up afterwards with things like URLs, resources, action items that we talked about so that folks know what they need to do and we can make sure that everybody's on the same page. I encourage you to consider gathering feedback from folks about accessibility, whether there were any accessibility barriers or things that could be done better in the next time, and then take that information to make adjustments to future meetings if you learn of something that might help your participants. Excellent.
I can talk a little bit about resources that we're pointing to here, and the URLs are in chat, and so you can gather those there. But highlighting a few, one is our Center for Universal Design and Education. We presented that briefly and use that as a framework on what we're doing. And it's at uw.edu/DOIT/CUDE. And again, I'm reading that because I'm not assuming people can read chat or they can even see the PowerPoints. And so that's a really has depth of resources and how to apply universal design, particularly to physical spaces, which goes beyond ADA compliance, and to services. Many of our services, because of the pandemic, have moved online. How can you make those services more inclusive of people with disabilities and others? To instruction, of course, that's a big part of this center, but also IT. How do you design IT so that it's accessible to people with disabilities? I touched on that briefly. And again, a lot can be learned from the resolutions, hundreds of them over the last few years about the inaccessible IT at post-secondary institutions. We also have a book, Creating Inclusive Learning Opportunities in Higher Education, a universal design toolkit, which summarizes a lot of what you can do with universal design, including a lot of action items that you could use on your campus or within your program. There's actually a discount on that book if you use the right code for that, which is on that website. So go there and you'll see that code. We also have there 20 tips for teaching an accessible online course. So I'm sure I gave a presentation on that yesterday, but much of what we talked today and more can be gleaned from that resource that has become very popular as a handout for presentations or training on campuses about making courses accessible. It includes the short story, not the long one, helping faculty get ready to get started in accessible design. And just so you know, one of the important ones is to avoid using PDFs. I mentioned that earlier, but PDFs are relatively difficult to make accessible when compared to Microsoft Word or even HTML within our learning management systems. You can learn how to design accessible PDFs, or you can choose to just not use them when you're sharing them with a group and want to be concerned about accessibility. Put your content within an HTML page, could be a website or your learning management system pages. That's the best way, and you still use some accessibility considerations as well. But also then you might want to consider a PDF as a special purpose document. If you go to our website, you're going to see a lot of videos. You can see a lot of publications about universal design. And so if you look at those, we have over 100 of them, I believe, you'll see that we do provide them in PDF form. But the primary content, the one that you go to when you first link to that resources, is the most inclusive one, which is HTML. And it's very, very nice. It's very well formatted. And then you'll see there's a link to PDF. Some units will do it the opposite way, where they have a PDF and they said, oh, by the way, if you need a text version, go over here. We make an effort to make sure that the main entrance to our publication, just like you do in a building, is the one that's most accessible and everyone can use. PDFs can be a little tricky, even because of what the technologies a person who's blind, let's say, is using in accessing that PDF. They have an older version of their screen reading technology, it might not work for them. Where you don't find that when you're using HTML. And also PDFs can be difficult to access using a smartphone and so forth. So think of PDFs as I do, which is they're great for when you want to print a handout. Remember those days when we had printed materials that we distribute at conferences, and probably including this one? That's great. I always use the PDF for that. But I also provide an electronic copy, either a URL or a CD or something. So just consider doing that and considering your materials. As I mentioned earlier, if you look at online learning, our online programs, it's the materials that are often inaccessible, and then the videos included in that. And then at uw.edu/DOIT, you will find links from Do It Center, but also from our many other projects that I mentioned, like Access Computing, where we have documents called Accessibility and Universal Design of Online Meetings, and another one from a different project on Equal Access, Universal Design of Your Presentation. So you might want to take a look at those. The second one is more general because it's not focused on online meetings, it focused on on-site and online meetings. And then the project I mentioned at the beginning too is Access Includes, which is a project's part of the Includes National Network, which is an NSF-funded experience for accessibility. So do we have anything in our Q&A?
Someone asked, said they don't like PDFs either because they're not editable, and you don't need a word processor to read it. Are there options for Word docs to be, they said they like PDFs because they're not editable and you don't need a word processor to read them. Are there options for Word docs to be readable and easily accessed?
Yes, and as far as PDFs, they're not editable, but I guess you need to think long and hard why that's so important to you. If you're going to share a documented PDF and you want to make sure someone doesn't steal your content, then you better think twice and not share it with them. It's very easy for a person who wants to steal that content to use optical character recognition and convert that into a text base or just to type it in. So it really doesn't do a lot of protection if you share it with anyone, like in a class or whatever. But also in some cases, I like people to edit the document. Why? To make it more appropriate for their application. In an online course, for instance, the biggest problem is using PDFs for the syllabus, inaccessible PDFs. What you've done for a student who's using a screen reader, they might have a learning disability or be blind, or they might be English language learners. What you basically have said on like a major sign, you in those classifications are not welcome in my class. I have not prepared for you if you don't provide that content in your syllabus in an accessible format. Word is easy to design an accessible document. You basically use styles to format your headings and your subheadings in a hierarchical manner. As you know, if you use Word, there's H1, H2, H3. And so that way, all of the structure is there. So a screen reader used by a person who is blind can skip from heading to heading and learn the organization of your syllabus or the paper you're sharing by using a screen reader to do that. Similarly, use the styles feature for a bulleted list What the screen reader will read is, oh, the following is a list and it has 7 items. And then it'll list those, and then the person can read that. Whereas if you don't include the formatting, the person who's blind using a screen reader doesn't know they're even accessing a list. And so it's hard for them to parse out what that content is. So again, I actually don't mind using PDFs as long as they're a secondary source, and particularly if you invest the time in creating accessible PDFs.
Somebody asked about whether auto captioning meets accessibility standards, and how accurate should it be to meet accessibility standards. And auto captioning is great for the purposes of universal design. You can turn it on. It's turned on here. If you go to the bottom of the screen where it says live transcribe, and you can see it on there. The 2 big things is that it doesn't necessarily include proper punctuation. The other thing is that it doesn't indicate who's speaking. So both of those make it less easy for somebody who cannot hear to follow the captions and follow what's going on in the meeting. It's also not particularly good with folks with accents and with jargon, right? So it's going to get names wrong. It's going to get technical terms wrong. So that can be problematic.
So
do you want to say something, Sheryl?
Particularly for people who have not requested an accommodation. So as Brianna has said, having them available and mentioning them to your audience, like with Zoom, is really a good way to go. But it's when you have a specifically request from a person who is deaf and they want captions specifically, then they tend not to be adequate. Although they're getting so much better. In Zoom, we actually were doing a presentation not long ago when they first came out with their captions. And by the way, our team has been working on those with them for quite some time. And we had 2 people who are deaf who requested a sign language interpreter. And so, or actually captions by someone who could make that ASL interpretation. And anyway, the captioner, the audio captioner, automatic captioner came in to do the captions, but she was late. And so we decided to approach the 2 students or people who are in the presentation and ask them, would you like, we're willing to wait until the captioner shows up, or would you like us to go ahead with the automatic captions? We asked them separately, so there's no pressure. Both of them said, let's go with the automatic captions. And so with their permission, then that's another thing. Otherwise, I would have felt obligated to wait until the captioner showed up. But it was interesting because we had both the captioner, when she did show up, her captions and the Zoom captions. And it could be debated, but in many cases, the Zoom captions were better, and they're immediate, almost immediate, because they're done by the computer, where there's a lag time for the human captioner. So my position is we're maybe at the point, and maybe we're at that point or soon to have that point, where it's reasonable to ask the person who is requesting an accommodation, would they like computer generated captions, or would they like to have a captioner, a live captioner? Again, it has to be their decision, not ours. But I have a feeling that more people will be satisfied with captions as they're better and better.
Well, and that decision has been complicated by the pandemic, as so many more things are going online and there's more demand for captioners. So you can't always secure quality captions generated by a person.
We got a minute left, and we have one more question.
Reached the end of our presentation, and so we're going to say goodbye. Thanks for joining us. And if you want to email us, take a look at our email addresses and send us email. So thank you very much for coming.
So we got about one question I think we have time for. There's one that says, any recommendation for an alternative to anything HTML for a form that you don't want edited but want folks to fill out specific fields?
Forms are quite complex, so it depends on the difficulty of your form, how complicated it is to make a decision about that. And so unless we see the form, wouldn't make a decision about that. But it is worth thinking about. And I would, if you don't have the technical expertise, to talk to your IT people on campus, or at least Google it. Often you can get some good responses that way.
I know I've used Google Forms with a variety of folks if you're trying to generate a survey. I believe that is reasonably accessible, but maybe not perfect.
Yeah, and it depends on how you actually set up that form as well.
Okay,
Okay,
that's it. Well, thanks, Cheryl and Brianna.
thank you.